Hello, and welcome everybody to our talk this evening, Chewing the Fat, Compassionately Unpacking Systemic and Cultural Fat Phobia. I'm really excited about this particular topic, and in a moment, I will introduce you to our presenter, Miranda Dolphin. My name is Nicole Imgrund, and I am the owner and director of Rivers Edge Counseling Center. The talk this evening is part of our series called Wellness Matters. We have one or two free talks every month. We have about 80 or 90 of them that have already been recorded and they're on our website. So you're welcome to take a look at all those topics. And I just want to let you know about a few that we have coming up as well in case you're interested. Um, we have a couple of in-person talks actually in April, which will be nice to go back to that a little bit, even though we're going to keep doing webinars as well. One of them is the journey to becoming a step family, and the other is cultural influences on mental health. And I know that we still have spaces open for both of those talks. Also, webinars this spring, we have from pregnancy to postpartum, ways to support your mental health through the journey. And we have Empowering Parenthood, Navigating the Autism Spectrum with Confidence and Care. And we'll end off our spring series here with Standing Up to the OCD Monster. And before long, we'll have all of our topics for fall as well. So you are welcome to join us anytime. And with that, I am going to introduce Miranda to you. Miranda is currently completing her master's in psychotherapy and spirituality at St. Stephen's College. And she is one of the practicum students at Rivers Edge Counseling Center. She practices therapy through a feminist, empathic, and trauma-informed lens, aiming to guide and support individuals in their journey of change and growth. Miranda's goal is to provide a safe, non-judgmental space where exploration, validation, and understanding thrive. She works with anxiety, depression, ADHD, sexual orientation, gender, self-esteem, and spirituality, as well as other presenting problems. And whatever you're coming to therapy for, Miranda is there to help clients to navigate past and present experience, identify patterns, and develop coping skills. Embracing diversity, Miranda welcomes clients from all backgrounds and identities. Using an anti-oppressive, intersectional feminist lens, she addresses societal structures while integrating various therapeutic modalities. Miranda prioritizes body positivity, neutrality, and non-diet approaches, and sprinkles in mindfulness, self-compassion, and humor when needed. With a background in seniors recreation therapy, I always think, Miranda, that I'm glad that you changed careers because now we have you, but I just imagine how much seniors just loved working with you. And from that work, she brings a lot of patience and playfulness to her therapeutic practice. Outside of work, Miranda enjoys reading, movies, nature, dancing, gardening, community building, and art. Good. Okay. We have the Q&A function is open. If you have questions you'd like Miranda to answer at the end of the presentation, use that. We also have the chat function. Feel free to say hello or post any comments or questions there as well. With that, I'm going to turn off my camera and come back for the Q&A later, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Okay, so I have PowerPoint today, so I'll just share my screen. Okay, so yeah, I'm doing a talk on fat phobia. I've chosen to do this talk because I'm already doing my big master's project about it, so didn't have to do a lot of fresh research or anything like that. And B, I am a fat person. This is very near and dear to me. This affects my life. So it's just an area that I think needs more awareness brought to it. And I feel like I'm the person to do the job because I've kind of gone through this long journey with my body and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like I'm ready to help other people do the same and also to understand the more sort of systemic, bigger picture things that are at play. So, okay, so before we get going, I should say that in sort of the fat liberationist, fat activist community, fat has been reclaimed as a neutral descriptor. So yeah, like tall, blonde, skinny, just a word to describe the way that bodies show up in the world. So and the reason we've kind of latched onto fat as the more neutral term is because terms like obesity and overweight are very sort of stigmatizing and pathologizing and can actually cause a lot of harm. So fat has kind of been reclaimed as the neutral term. So yeah, I will be using it throughout the discussion. So if that bothers you, just gonna let you know right away, but that is the terminology I will be using. And a few more content warnings. Obviously, there's going to be discussion of weight bias and fat phobia. There's also going to be some discussion of actual weight. So if that is triggering for you, just be aware now. If you need to leave at any time, that's totally fine. I'll try to let you know when it's coming if I can flag it. And then yeah, just fat phobia is just kind of entrenched with all these other systemic biases, so it's going to come up when we're talking about it. And yeah, just this is a safe space, so no bullying, no meanness about other people's bodies. You're welcome to discuss your body or have questions about that. That's fine, but just try to keep your language as neutral as possible. And if you're not comfortable saying fat and then you want to say overweight or something like that, that's totally up to you. That's totally fine. But just when you're describing other people's bodies, if that ever comes up, use the terminology they would like. Yeah. Okay, so what is fat phobia? So yeah, fat phobia is a societal bias, oppression, and discrimination against individuals based on their body size. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into this, but I just really want to emphasize that it isn't just individual, it is on a societal level, and it's ingrained into a lot of different parts of our world. So we're gonna get into what those are. So any guesses? So 60% of Canadians as of 2020, according to Stats Canada, are of the BMI, which in itself is a whole problematic thing that puts them at overweight or obese. So more than half of the population is fat. So I think that's just kind of an important thing to know. And it just really pinpoints how needed this kind of information and reckoning is in our world right now, because it affects so much of the population. So what people often think fat phobia is just something very small, just the hatred of fat people or the literal fear of fat people. But of course, what it actually is a whole bunch of different stuff. So it's diet culture, it's asking people when they're pregnant, it's complimenting weight loss, it's the war on obesity. It's just all of these systemic things that are just kind of cooked into our culture that end up being oppressive and discriminatory. And again, we'll get a little deeper into that. So it's kind of everywhere. So in our laws, currently in Alberta, there is no law that protects workers against discrimination based on weight, unless it is categorized as a disability. But for a lot of people, that's not the categorization they're really using. So you can be fired for being too fat technically in Alberta right now, and in a lot of places in Canada still. They just tried to get a law passed in Manitoba banning this, and it did not go through. So in our laws, it is still technically legal to discriminate against people based on weight and based on appearance. So in workplaces, there's a lot of different elements where fat phobia might show up. So on the more bigger systemic level, again, you can be fired based on weight. a lot of people are not hired if they are in larger bodies. They're just discriminated against before they can even get into the workplace. They're given less raises, less opportunities to advance career, and often because of that sort of internalized fat phobia are less likely to even apply to those positions where they might be able to advance. And on top of all of the kind of more institutional level stuff, there's also a lot of kind of microaggressions and workplace culture stuff that can come up into play, like wellness initiatives where if the team loses a certain amount of weight, you win a pizza party, which in itself is a whole weird convoluted thing, or something like that, where you're celebrated for not being fat, basically, at the end of the day, or getting farther away from being fat. And then on top of that, there's often a lot of diet talk at lunch, comments on bodies, people congratulating you on weight loss, no matter what the cause is, and going very noticeably silent when you put on weight, or worse, commenting on that as well. So there's just sort of this culture baked into our workplaces where it is okay to talk about people's bodies and it is okay to discriminate against people based on their bodies still. Education, basically right now, obviously there's bullying and stuff. We'll get into sort of youth in a different slide, but there's also just not really anything included. Like there might be a throwaway sentence or something in the syllabus about fat phobia or anti-weight bias, but it's not, even at a graduate and an undergraduate level, it is not being considered an important enough thing to include into diversity training or multicultural trainings. So it's just not showing up. So that's why I've got my little guy here. We're waiting. We need more. In the world of dating and relationships, people are less likely to get dates if they are fat. They are less likely to be in long-term relationships. If one or both partners is fat phobic, no matter what size the people's bodies were, this was a very interesting study. There was just a lower level of satisfaction with relationships across the board. And yeah, it's just kind of a lot of people are same with kind of not putting themselves out for, advancements in the workplace. They're also just not putting themselves out there to date because they don't want to deal with that rejection and they don't want to deal with the harassment that can come, especially now that dating has moved to kind of a more anonymous online space where it is easier to be a troll. It is easier to harass people. So of course, you maybe don't want to put a picture of your body online. So yeah, so that's another facet where people are just kind of seeing these systemic things come up. Media. So for anybody who watches Friends, that's Fat Monica. So you kind of look at that and I don't know, depending on what your mindset is, you think, oh, that's so dated. I can't believe they put her in a fat suit. That's really embarrassing that they made jokes about that. And then you look at movies that came out last year that were nominated for awards and you see something like The Whale, where it's this story about a man suffering because of his body, and it's just, created by a thin man, written by thin people, putting a thin actor in a fat suit in 2023 and then getting put up for a bunch of awards. So it's still very present. And I think even perhaps worse is just the fact that you just don't see fat bodies. There's been kind of a push in the last few years to have more diversification, different, races of people, all that kind of stuff. But for fat people, there's really not much. There's like been a few shows that have come out, but we're just kind of relegated to that fat funny friend or the villain in the Disney movie, or we're still not getting to be main characters. So we're just seeing both a lack of representation, and then the representation that we're getting is not great. And then just the literal infrastructure of the world, like how the world is set up. So things like airplane seats, they're getting smaller and smaller. And yet when a fat person gets on a plane to sit down and take their seat, they are the ones being punished rather than the airlines for wanting to maximize profit and minimize comfort. And there's just kind of this shaming that goes on in these kind of interactions that just makes people, again, not want to leave their house, not want to fly, not want to go anywhere, or not be able to afford it because some people physically cannot fit in seats, and not everybody can afford to buy 2 airplane seats. And then just things like if you go to a restaurant and they've got those flimsy little chairs or little stools that have been so popular lately, and you don't know if the stool is even going to support you or if you're going to fall on your butt in front of an entire restaurant. Another thing that just makes you not feel safe in the world and not feel like you're wanted. So there's these literal things kind of cooked into our world that are making us not fit. And that really wears on you. And then I forgot to have a little slide here about this, but of course, fashion and clothing, same sort of thing. The average woman's size is a size 16, and now it's starting to move to a size 18, and yet most mainstream stores go up to a size 12. I think there's maybe one store I can shop in a mall, and it's the purely plus size store. And I'm not, there's kind of a scale of fatness, and I'm on the lower end of the scale. So for people who are in even bigger bodies, they are relegated to a few stores online that basically just sell like tent dresses. And like, how many stores do you see that go up to a 6X? Like maybe one, maybe two. So it's just another way to limit us to access the world and to feel like we fit and to be able to like put on something cute and go out and feel good about ourselves. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, so this is, so the 4 eyes of oppression is kind of a sociological explanation of what makes something oppression. So I kind of put fat phobia through that lens as well. So you start with so we start with ideological. So this is just kind of the bigger idea. So it's just perpetuating that fatness is bad and thinness is good. And it's kind of just being cooked into all of these big systems of oppression. So we're going to get deeper into this in the history, but colonialism, racism, ableism, patriarchy, capitalism, it's just kind of all of these things are tying together to make this like huge mess that includes fat phobia and kind of keeps fat phobia in place. And from there, we get that institutional fat phobia. So again, we're seeing that in healthcare, and we're going to talk about healthcare more in depth in another slide because that is one of the most upsetting areas of fat phobia. So we'll get deeper into that. Again, into laws, into education, workplaces, infrastructure, and it just means that the world has become less accessible for fat people, and we're just being denied so much. And it's just, again, kind of this institutional level where it's not really under our control in any way, shape, or form. And we can't change it without the institutions themselves changing. And then interpersonal. So this is kind of in those personal relationships. They have done studies that show that often the most fat phobic people in your life are the people that are close to you. So that would be family members, parents, loved ones of any kind of shape or size who are just close to you. That is often where you are getting kind of the most overt fat phobia directed your way. Oh, whoa, what just happened? Okay. Okay, I don't know how that happened. Anyway. And yeah, so it's those fat jokes, advice or praise about weight loss, diet advice, body critiques, body monitoring. It's like when you show up for Thanksgiving and instead of somebody saying hello to you, they say, "Oh, you got bigger." And it's just kind of that first thing that is getting commented on before them even being excited to see you. And yeah, again, it ends up, you see it on the dating apps, you see it in lower relationship rates for all fat people, and just a lot of crap. So that is the interpersonal level. And then on the intrapersonal level, that's where we're kind of seeing the internalization of fat phobia. So we're getting fed this narrative from a very young age, and do we start to believe it? So it's that self oppression, that thinking that you aren't good enough, and again, not putting yourself out there because you've been told again and again that you're not good enough. Again, efforts to conform and so be a good fat person. That often means kind of like performing health, being like, oh, I'm not like the other fatties. I can still do this. I'm still trying to lose weight. I'm not going to be in this body permanently. Yeah, and equating their value with their weight loss and linking body size with health and just feeling unworthy of healthcare and of just care in general. So that's the more intrapersonal level. I had a thought. I think it's gone. Okay, well, we'll see if it comes back. Yeah. Okay, so healthcare. So healthcare is one of the most sort of toxic cesspools of fat phobia out there right now. They've done lots and lots and lots and lots of studies about this, so there's a lot of data, and I can link some of that later on if anybody's interested. But basically, we're just kind of seeing all of these different reactions from doctors when fat people come into their offices. So, I mean, overt discrimination, just discussion of your fatness and how bad it is. Disgust reactions. This is actually another study where there's an implicit bias test they gave doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers, and the majority of them have a disgust reaction to a fat body, even if they don't realize it. Denial of care. So, say you go in and you have an ear infection, they tell you to lose weight. They don't deal with the ear infection, they don't give you anything. They say, go lose weight and talk to me then. And again, that prejudice. So in this case, I mean like really like actual prejudging, where if they see that you're a fat person, they are making assumptions about you. They think you're going to be difficult, that you're going to be non-compliant because when they tell you to lose weight, you don't, or if you do, it's not enough. And they just think that you're going to be basically a waste of time. So again, they've done studies that show this is how doctors are showing up and this is how they think of fat people. Some of it is explicit, some of it is implicit, but it's there. And then that infantilization. How many times does a fat person go to a doctor and they say, oh, it's just calories? What calories in versus calories out, or some really simple diet advice that you've probably heard since the time you were like 7 years old, and they think that you are too stupid to get it. So they're telling it to you again in this sort of saccharine voice. That's kind of that infantilization piece. And then, of course, this leads to avoidance. Fat people don't want to go to the doctor. They're going to the doctor less. They're putting off serious medical treatment for years because they are scared of getting all of this stuff happen to them, because it has and it will again. So these quotes here, a fat activist, Virgie Tovar, did a qualitative study where she talked to fat people about the worst experiences they've had at the doctor. So I guess I can read them out loud, but again, this is going to be kind of a bit of a trigger warning. So there's obviously going to be some health discrimination, weight discrimination stuff going on here, and also I think some mentions of suicide. So just be aware. If you want to just take your headphones off for 3 minutes while I go over this slide, you can. That's totally fine, but I will read these out loud. So I was prescribed fen-phen in 7th grade. So for anybody that doesn't know, that is a weight loss drug. I lost so much weight so fast it was unhealthy, but he kept reassuring me I would be happy when I was able to start high school weighing less. I would eat so little I would black out when I stood up and my hair started falling out. So this is a 13-year-old. I've gotten treated like an unworthy animal by medical professionals. They would touch me as little as possible, disgust clearly written across their grimaces. He'd ask me questions like, how could I let myself get so big? And if my husband had issues with my weight. I'd been suffering from nerve pain in the thoracic region of my vertebral column, the result of an injury. My doctor told me that the pain was a result of me being morbidly obese, charged my insurance the maximum allowable for an office visit, and dismissed me with a referral to a nutritionist. I still live with nerve pain every day, with some days being so bad that I contemplated killing myself to be free of it. One time I had a pinched nerve in my back. Not knowing that that was the issue, I went to the doctor. She told me it was because I was overweight and that my back was hurting because my body was a bus on an office desk. I was 18. So yeah, take a breath if you need. It's just, and I've talked to my friends about it. This is happening right now. This is still happening. This is happening in Alberta. This is happening across the world. There's just such a disconnect from the humanity of fat people. And it really is showing up in medical spaces, especially. So, and what are they prescribing? Diets. How many diets work? Maybe 5%. Some people say even less. Some people say 2%. But 95% of the time, there is no long term, like, diet that actually works. You are always gaining the weight back. So they are prescribing something that in any other case, if this was a medicine, if this was any other form of healthcare, would never be prescribed. It does not work. And they've done lots of studies on it. There are some more recent ones. This is just a nice little figure I was able to find, but they've done huge meta-analyses that just show that dieting does not work for the long term. So yeah, it's just really disheartening. um, yeah. And then of course fat phobia itself is unhealthy. It's actually often what is causing sort of the health issues that we associate with being fat. It's actually the fat phobia that is causing a lot of this. So they've done lots and lots of studies on discrimination and stress that show if you are in we say marginalized, but a group that is discriminated against or oppressed, the effects of stress just cause so many different health issues, including weight gain and a lot of cardiovascular issues, which again are often being associated with the actual fat on your body. But instead, they're starting to see now that a lot of the cardiovascular issues are to do more with the discrimination and stress that you face as a fat person existing in the world. And weight cycling, they've done a lot of studies on this as well that show that kind of that yo-yo dieting, that going up and down is extremely bad for your metabolism. It kind of can really mess it up for the rest of your life. And again, can have a lot of different cardiovascular effects and similar effects to that of stress, because you are literally putting stress on your body again and again and again. And of course, I mean, diet culture is this huge multi-billion-dollar capitalist beast. And so much money is spent every year to try and lose weight. So there are huge financial burdens that come along with this. I think probably the most prescient example right now would be people who are trying to get Wegovy or Ozempic. So we're not going to go too deeply into that. I will link a really great podcast episode on that if you want to find out more about that specific area. But I can't remember how much money it cost. It's in the States, it's $15,000 a year. I'm not sure how much it is in Canada, but it's just another huge financial burden and another thing that you have to take for your entire life, or as soon as you stop, the weight will come back, just like dieting. So, and again, just the internalization is so unhealthy. It leads to depression, it leads to anxiety, it leads to suicidality, and just a feeling of being worthless and not being able to start your life until you are in a different body, which again, as we've seen for a lot of people, may never happen. So Yeah, so some recent studies have shown that the mortality that they are kind of prescribing as part of obesity is actually much more likely linked to the actual weight discrimination. Okay, so I'm gonna take a breath, take a sip of water here. So how did we get here? Why is this so deeply cooked into our culture? So this section, we're going to be talking about racism. We're going to be talking about slavery, a lot of stuff like that. I don't have a great slide for this, so, but we're just going to be using my notes a little bit more for this. So if I'm looking over here, that's why. Okay, so first thing to know is that fat people have always existed. Obviously, it changes a little bit depending on what culture you've grown up in, but there have always been fat people. And there were fat people before there was fat phobia and before there was worries about fat people's health. And then this is just a lovely weight loss ad. But it is interesting when you look at kind of these weight loss ads, there are some in the opposite direction as well, urging people to put on weight. So there's always been people trying to sell us something to change our base form. So this is just sort of an example of some fat bodies throughout history that I just thought was kind of really lovely to see, because I don't think we ever really see fat bodies in history books or in anything like that. So and just kind of a nice visual representation of the fact that there has always been fat people. Um, yeah. Oh. Okay, moving on. All right, so I'm gonna if you're interested in learning kind of more in this area, I would really heavily recommend this book, Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. That's where I got a lot of my information, and also from a few studies. I have not put my sources in. I will be putting those in before it gets posted. So if you do want to look into the sources a little bit deeper, you definitely will be able to. But yeah, so one of the hugest reasons that fat phobia exists is racism, colonialism, and white supremacy. So there's a very long history. I'll try to keep it pretty brief, but basically several hundred years ago, as chattel slavery kind of became more and more popular and colonialism required us to have that labor in other countries as we were colonizing. Um, they needed to create more separation between the white ideal and the racialized other, because it is a lot easier to see people as animals if we can separate them from us, right? So there were lots of ways to do this. Obviously, skin color was the biggest one, but body fat was also a way to do this, because for a lot of people of African descent, body fat shows up differently on bodies. There tends to be more of it. There tends to be more of it, especially kind of in certain areas. So they just, and of course, Africa is huge. So this is totally different across the country, but for kind of the areas where they were enslaving people, a lot of them did sort of have this different body type. So to further separate white people from black people, they started sort of to other the fat body type and to present the fat body type as the monstrous other. So it just was another way to create enough separation to kind of get over the whole morality issue of enslaving people. And this sort of trickled down into the art world. Don't know if I have. Yeah. So guess who was in charge of the art world? A bunch of white men. So kind of around this time, they were also creating a lot of treatises on what ideal beauty is, and like spreading them around and having debates about it, and all this, just again, white men talking to white men about what the ideal female form was. And again, the ideal female form was predominantly white, very pale, and kind of that hourglass figure without any extra fat on it. And again, when they did talk about Black women's bodies, it would kind of be as an outlier, or as like a look at this abomination kind of thing, right? So they would sometimes be included in these treatises, but they would not be there to be the ideal. So they're kind of proliferating this across Europe at the same time as racism, but slavery is becoming more and more like, it's becoming a very important part of the economy. So this is all going on. And then, of course, while this is going on, we're colonizing North America. So that means, of course, the first kind of people who are colonizing are, where do I have this? Oh, are Puritans. So they're kind of cooking into American culture right from the beginning, a lot of puritanical ideas. So, just that we need to not be sinful. And what are two of the major sins? Of course, gluttony and sloth. So that's already kind of cooked into that culture. And that we need to be productive, and we don't want to be ostentatious, and we just kind of want to be people who keep our heads down and work hard and kind of work to help the collective. So again, we're getting sort of this ideal American woman becoming the sort of white, very thin ideal, which is exactly opposite of the slaves that they are bringing over at the same time. And again, if you want to get deeper into this, Sabrina does a much more coherent job than me. But and of course, while this is happening, I should have put these in the other order, but capitalism is starting to become more and more powerful. The Industrial Revolution is going on, and we're sort of starting to see the rise of people having spending money. And, the white men in power want to control that spending money. So we're starting to also see things like women's magazines starting to pop up, and periodicals where they can basically create trend cycles, which had sort of existed at this point, but it was much slower, much less global, and it would kind of take years to trickle around. But now they've got a way to create much faster trend cycles where people can decide what the ideal is, and again, bring more money in, because this hasn't really changed. They're always going to be holding that carrot just a little bit in front of you, so that you always have to keep spending money to keep fitting into the trend or the ideal of the time. And this is being done again a lot through periodicals and women's magazines. So that's kind of all happening at the same time. And then this ideal of ableism, which ties into a concept which I forgot to do a slide on, but it's called healthism. It's basically this idea that, again, is very ingrained into the American and kind of, because we're so close, Canadian culture, that our health is under our control individually, and that it is our job as a good citizen to perform health and to have health, and that's our role, and our job is to maintain it. So this is tied into ableism because, of course, people who don't have that health are discriminated against, and again, are not able to access the world in the way that we are, and are facing all of these discriminations. And we're going to get into this a little bit more on my section on health at every size, but it's definitely still cooked into even sort of the activism against fat phobia. So But this is all this is cooking up, and we're just seeing sort of this fat phobia getting deeper and deeper entrenched into the culture. And I did forget a little note here. This is also sort of where romanticism and I'm thinking of it in French. I did my social studies in French. So the Enlightenment, that's all going on at the same time. And again, it's kind of these like fairly upper class white men sitting around and coming up with ideas about the world. And a fair amount of those ideas also have to do with bodies. And they're starting to sort of spread this idea that the ideal man, again, is this sort of ascetic, thin, waifish dandy, and that people who are fat are stupid and lazy. And again, this is all tied into race and all that stuff as well, but they're kind of spreading this idea as well. And you're seeing it pop up in like political cartoons and stuff like that, of just like the fat body represents this sort of lazy idiot. So all of this is happening. Oh, and individualism, but that's kind of tied into that healthism, the every person for themselves. We're kind of moving away from the collective as we get more into the middle of the 20th century. Okay, so oh, did I? Okay, I should have had a slide on the BMI. What time are we at? Okay, the BMI is very messed up. I will link a nice little podcast about that. But basically, there's a lot of eugenics and stuff that's kind of cooked into it, and it is never made to be used individually. So the fact that we are still using it in doctors' offices to this day is really messed up. And it really does not reflect it was made again for white men, so it doesn't really work for people of color or women. So yeah, that's all happening as well at the same time. And then we're getting sort of as a reaction, but not until kind of the 60s and 70s, we're getting the rise of fat activism. So we're not going to read this out because we are getting a little bit low on time, but this was kind of a manifesto that some fat activists put out in the 70s. But the thing with fat activism is it kind of existed for this like 40, 50-year period of time, but it was really still not mainstream, not really getting a lot of attention. It was kind of relegated more to like queer groups or people of color, and just not ever really reaching the mainstream level and attention that it is sort of getting in the last 10, 20 years. So how does it kind of get to where it is today? Mostly it's blogs. So in the 2000s, kind of the rise of blogging culture starts up, and we're starting to see women able to share their experiences and kind of keep basically online journals about what it's like to be who they are. And some of these women are fat. So, and this is also kind of tied into third wave feminism. So this is all happening at once. So yeah, we're getting these sort of online spaces that never existed before, and this mass globalization and ability to talk to other people that are nowhere near you. And it kind of acts as a bit of a consciousness raising thing, like in the 70s, where they'd bring a bunch of women into the room and kind of talk about their experiences. This is now happening in online spaces. And yeah, this is just one of the sources I have for us, but it's Fatties of Alberta. So it was Fatties of Edmonton, but it's actually a Facebook group run by some Edmonton women. And it is kind of, again, acting as a bit of this sort of consciousness raising group, but just also demonstrating how you can kind of have this community space online where you can rant, where you can ask for help, where you can ask for recommendations, where you can share your experience and just be able to see what's going on with other people and like have that strength in numbers that we've never really had before. Okay, so what's going on right now? So health at every size. Again, we're a little bit low on time, but basically it is a movement that happened, I think, again, about around 20 years ago, where the idea is everybody can be healthy no matter what their size is. It's all kind of about intuitive eating and joyful movement and things like that, and just sort of listening to your body and your hunger cues and respecting them. But again, it is kind of resting on that idea that we owe the world health. So that's there's some contention a little bit on both sides, but I still think it is better than what we have just kind of in the mainstream medical world. And there is a list of health at every size practitioners for Edmonton that I will also try and track down and link. Yeah, again, we're getting more community. I could talk for years on this subject, but basically, fat people have never really had a community because fatness is seen as this liminal state that you are just in until you get thin. So nobody has ever really latched on to the identity of being fat, again, until like the last few years or in those more alternative spaces. But now we're kind of seeing people realize that some people are just fat and maybe I'm just fat and maybe that's okay, and kind of build these communities where you can celebrate your body with other women who look kind of similar to you, right? Or other people. It doesn't, obviously, it's not all women, but this just seemed to predominantly show up more in female spaces. Fat studies. So this is an area of studies where they've started doing research by fat people for fat people. So we're having people who actually have the lived experience doing research about like the health things that are affecting us. And again, those more kind of qualitative studies about fat existence. And that, again, pretty recent, last 20 years. But this is one that's in Canada. So this just came out this last year, so 2023. So just some really interesting like essays and studies in there. Media, like I said, we're still getting crumbs, but crumbs is still more than we used to get, which was like atoms. So it maybe is slowly moving towards more, but yeah, I've linked some media, education. So we're not really seeing it so much in syllabuses yet. It is very slowly starting to be included a little bit more, but we are seeing a lot of, again, these sort of online spaces and creators who are making workshops, making talks, making sort of things for therapists, things for healthcare practitioners, where they can learn about these biases and sort of actionable tools that they can introduce, again, at that more institutional level that they are a part of. And it was, as well as just being more stuff for people to educate themselves with in general. So yeah, and online, kind of talked about that already, but again, kind of creating that in group, creating that consciousness raising, and just having that safe space is really, really important. Okay, so how can we help? So the main thing, I mean, not the main thing, one of the most important things is recognizing that you have a bias. I have a bias and I have done so much work and it's still there because of all the stuff I've just discussed. It's totally understandable and normal that it's seeped into us, right? So like, and again, it might be implicit, it might be explicit, but it's likely there is some bias there. And maybe you don't see it when you're looking at, again, like smaller fat people, but it comes up with larger fat people, or maybe it's gendered, or maybe it, has to do with race. There's all this stuff that could be tied into it. But the very important thing to recognize is that it's normal. It doesn't make you a bad person to have this bias. It just makes you human and a human living in a society that is fat phobic. But that by recognizing it, that's kind of the first step in changing it and kind of bringing that awareness to it and being able to kind of hold it at arm's distance and say, hey, I don't think that's mine. And I don't think I want to keep holding on to that. So I think that is, yeah, okay, I'm going to say this is step one, is to just recognize it in yourself, give yourself that grace, give yourself that kind of grounding and care and self-compassion that it's okay that you have it, that it doesn't make you a bad person, but that it is something that maybe you need to start pulling out. Okay, and again, sort of leading with empathy. So just really being able to put yourself in the shoes of a fat person and recognize their humanity and think about how your actions are affecting them. And maybe you are a fat person. I don't really know what my audience is today, but just having that empathy for others is so important, because no matter what body we're in, we're all human and we all are deserving of care and kindness from each other. So I did include this little piece here about kind of a very common thing to hear is the "I feel fat," which just means somebody is feeling bad about their body. But when you're saying that in front of fat people or kids or whoever, you're just kind of ignoring the experience of what it actually is to be fat. And again, kind of tying the word fat to the negative. So anyway, there's lots of stuff about this I will link as well, and ask a fat person. So nothing about us without us. This was actually created by Shooty. I don't remember her last name. I should have put it on here. But again, I'll add this at the end. But she was somebody who was kind of working against ableism, who was in, I believe, a wheelchair. And she kind of coined this phrase, "nothing about us without us," to sort of encapsulate that idea that all of these people who are kind of putting out the studies, who are at the head of the hospitals, who are in these big sort of medical or institutional positions, are making all of the big like plans about us and not consulting us. And that just doesn't work. And that means that we are not getting the care that we need or want. So again, very good at talking about fat people without ever talking to fat people. So same kind of idea. And again, that's why that sort of that fat studies sort of branch of academia has been created, because we should be doing this research while talking to fat people and asking what they need and what would make their lives better. So be an ally or an advocate. So this one's a little tricky. So if you're in a fat body, it can be a lot harder to advocate for yourself because you have dealt with that shame and you maybe have internalized some of that fat phobia. But if you can advocate for yourself, do so. I'll again link some resources kind of on how to do that. And I will say that that Fatties of Alberta group, if you kind of put a little post in it and say, hey, I have to do this, I have to go to the doctor and ask not to be weighed, something along those lines, there's a lot of people who will respond and give you advice and kind of, really cheer you on. So that could be a really nice space if you need help advocating for yourself. And just like knowing that you deserve to advocate for yourself and you deserve care and you deserve to be treated like a human. That's really important. And then on sort of the side of being an ally, so an ideal ally is somebody who can kind of go into those places that maybe there's too much shame or trauma for a fat person to go in, and go into a restaurant and be like, hey, how much weight can that bench hold up? Do you think that's right that you have that? Go into a store and be like, why do you only go up to a size 10? Are you ever going to change that? Just kind of be annoying and like call people out on their stuff. And, write letters to airlines saying, hey, we need bigger seats, or, to the representation in Alberta. And again, I'll try to find who I should link for that, to say weight should be included as part of the Discrimination Act. Like, what are we doing? Just be loud. But when it comes to hearing about experience, raise the voice of fat people. Don't raise your own. So that's kind of the most very important part about being an ally, is making a ruckus in the places where fat people don't feel safe. But when it's actually time to speak on experience, pass the mic to somebody who is living that experience. Yeah, and diversify your media. So I'm sending a big link. Actually, I think it's going to be on this slide. So I've got a QR code that's going to pop up. So if you want to try to do that, it should link to secondary site, and then you just have to hit like OK, and then it should open a Google Doc. So I'm going to be adding to that Google Doc. It'll be kind of a live doc. But yeah, basically, one of the best things you can do to target fat bias and internalize fat bias is just to like look at fat bodies. Look at fat bodies being joyful, living their life, doing stuff, existing in the world, and just being human. So a part of that is like diversifying your Instagram feed, diversifying your TikTok, reading books by fat people. Something I haven't included on this list, but I should. There's actually a really lovely amount of romance novels about fat people. Just like look at different bodies and don't assume that the norm and the like average body is the body that we are presented, because by no means is it not. And here's the QR code. So I'll leave this up for a second, but yeah, there's just a lot out there. And again, I will continue to add to this. I will say my number one most recommended thing on that list is Maintenance Phase, which is a podcast. If you hadn't listened to it, it is incredible. And quite funny too. So it's able to deliver a lot of sort of interesting stuff about health and kind of what health is in North America at this point, while also, yeah, generally making me laugh. And I would really recommend that if this is something you want to kind of delve deeper into. Okay. All right, and another really important piece is educating children. So they've done studies that show that fat phobia starts as early as 3 years old. So kids are already starting to hate their bodies at 3. And that that is just such a bummer. And yeah, I mean, if you look at children's media, you're not really seeing fat bodies outside of the roles of villains or maybe of parents very occasionally. But it's just, again, an area in media that is just so completely lacking in representation. And of course, this can lead to a whole bevy of stuff. A lot of the similar stuff you see in adults: anxiety, depression. I don't know if there's any information on suicidality, but just a lot of bullying as well, of course, which I experienced as a fat child. It still exists, still going on. So just learning early on, and even if your kid isn't fat, just being like, hey, everybody exists in their bodies and all bodies are fine. And especially for kids who, they grow out and they grow up and they grow out and they grow up. So even if perhaps your kid isn't going to be fat their whole life, they're probably going to be fat for like a little portion of it. So it's just an area where we should be educating people really early, kind of modeling that acceptance, not disparaging our bodies in front of children, not talking about diets in front of kids, not like hating on our own bodies, because kids notice that. And again, there's a couple studies on this where it's just like very clear that the hatred is first passed on by the caregiver, not by society. So just be really aware of how you're showing up around little people. Okay, and give yourself grace. Like I said, this is huge. This is just like baked in for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's going to be really hard to kind of pull it out of yourself. But I'm really passionate about it. I think it's extremely important. And it's just kind of like one of the few parts of like, oh, my brain's done. It's just like one of the few discriminations. It's still kind of socially acceptable, still pretty welcome in society. You're still seeing fat suits, you're still seeing fat jokes, you're still having people coming up to you and asking you why you have something in your cart. Like it's just still so socially acceptable, and it needs to not be, and we need to stop it. And I'm just really passionate about that, but it's gonna take time. Start with yourself if you can, and just be really nice to yourself and self-compassionate, and understand that like this this is not your fault that it's part of you, but it is something that you can change. Yeah, and that's just a really powerful quote. My life wouldn't be easier if I were thin. My life would be easier if this culture wasn't obsessed with oppressing me because I am fat. The solution to a problem like bigotry is not to do everything in our power to accommodate the bigotry, it's to get rid of the bigotry. Yeah, that's it. Whoa. Okay, I went a little over, but thank you for bearing with me.
Oh, that was so worth it. That was an amazing presentation and so rich with resources, Miranda.
Thank you.
There is a lot there that's going to be helpful. Um, for those of you who can't stay for any questions, I'm just going to say goodbye and thank you for joining us. We're always happy to have you at any of our talks. I hope you have a good night.